Well, you've almost certainly seen it. The campaign is on across the country. You may have contributed. It's February, and that means Heart Month, where the focus is on raising money and awareness about those dual killers, heart failure and strokes. Tonight, we take a look at what's been accomplished, why there's still a long way to go, and what simple things we can do to be a part of the cure. Danielle Martin, family physician at Women's College Hospital, Jay Udell, cardiologist at the Peter Munk Center, Samir Sinha, geriatrician at Mount Sinai, and Maria Recupero, a registered dietitian at the University Health Network, all here in Toronto. Their thoughts in a moment, but first, some facts. You heard the stat at the top of our broadcast tonight. Every 7 minutes, a Canadian dies from heart disease or stroke. Every 7 minutes. Now, as bad as that sounds, it's a lot better than it was barely half a century ago. Death rates have declined by more than 75% since then. Still, every year, more than 350,000 Canadians are hospitalized from these ailments. Heart disease accounting for the overwhelming majority of cases. And the bill adds up big time. Almost $21 billion in physician services, hospital costs, lost wages, and decreased productivity. But there is a straightforward way to change all these depressing numbers. Adopting healthy behavior can delay the onset of both heart disease or stroke by as much as 14 years. Eating and drinking right, no tobacco, regular exercise, it all sounds so simple. Why isn't it happening? And how can attitudes change? Time for some answers. All right, let me start with something I didn't mention in that pack, and that's family history. How much of a role does genetics play in all this?
Well, family history plays a role not just in terms of actual heart disease and stroke, but also the risk factors for heart disease and stroke, such as high blood pressure, diabetes, and high cholesterol. But how much of that is genetic versus how much of that is people learning how to eat and how to, spend our time from our family environment is hard to tease out. It turns out actually that even in the people who have a very strong family history, adapting a healthier lifestyle can really make a difference.
Jay, you're a cardiologist. Family history, what do you say on it?
You're finally playing to my strengths. So, there's these commercial products out there now, like 23andMe and others, that want to sell to the consumer that you can go and get a blood test or a saliva test and they can tell you your genetic risk. But to be frank, the studies that have been done, pivotal studies done out of the Canadian research from Dr. Youssef and others, that show that the vast majority of risk factors that are traditional risk factors, smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, those explain about 50% of your risk. And then when you broaden it out to things like depression, alcohol intake, obesity, that actually explains 90% of your risk. So family history, although important in those patients who actually have it, on a population basis does not actually drive the majority of risk. And as Danielle said, if those risk factors that we can identify, some people are predisposed, but if we can identify those and we can actually modify that risk and we can work on your risk factors, that's what really will prevent you from getting heart attacks and strokes.
Well, if you are concerned about family risk, what about testing? Should you be testing, and at what age should you be testing?
I think a lot of people focus on, should I get a genetic test? If my father had a heart attack or my grandfather had a heart attack, should I get that test done? But really, we don't talk about genetic testing because, if you actually live long enough, pretty much all of my patients have heart disease. I think really what we try and emphasize is testing or looking at risk factors, right? So this is where having a primary care provider really important, making sure that from a young age, that you're actually making sure you're checking your blood pressure, having your cholesterol checked, getting those risk factors assessed, and then making sure, are you following the dietary and lifestyle things? And this is something even for my oldest patients, I'm still making sure that we stop smoking, that we're focusing on exercise and lifestyle, because all of that's important.
All right, Maria, you're the dietitian at the table, so let's talk diet.
Sure.
It's come up here already a lot. Is it the major factor or one of the major factors in this?
So it is a major factor, of course. Diet is important, but you can't just look at diet alone. I mean, everything that we're talking about here are the risk factors. When they're all clustered together, all of them play a role here in reducing risk. But when it comes to diet, I mean, simply getting enough fruits and vegetables can reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke by 20%. That's just looking at fruits and vegetable intake.
What's enough fruit and vegetable?
So any amount, I think, is great, so it all depends on where people are starting from. But, Canada's Food Guide and many other practice guidelines do recommend that people include at least, 7 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And people sometimes feel overwhelmed with that number, thinking, my goodness, how is this possible? Yeah. But when you actually...
You're not saying like 7 apples or...
No, I'm not saying 7 fruit and 7 vegetables. That's combined fruits and vegetables. And when you look at what a serving size is, they're actually quite small. I will admit, it can still be challenging to get enough fruits and vegetables in a day. But the fact that servings are small, like a medium-sized apple or orange, maybe the size of a tennis ball, or half a cup, basically is what we're looking at. What it does mean, though, is being aware and mindful that every time we go to eat, if we can attempt to include some kind of fruit or vegetable along with that, you're going to get closer to that goal. So it may be achievable for most.
Let's try and break down some of the myths here. And, Samir, you mentioned cholesterol. I'm confused now because there was a recent study about cholesterol. It wasn't as important. It was suggesting that it has played in the past. So where are we on cholesterol?
Yeah, I think, first of all, a lot of people just get fat phobic. They think anything that's related to fat is bad. But what we're actually learning is that not all fats are created equal. Cholesterols and even some basic saturated fats actually can be good. It's the trans fats, those aren't good. Those are artificial, they're not healthy, and they're not helpful. And we also try and also not just focus on the fats. We want to make sure that people, if they're also saying, I'm going to eat things that are fat-free, because you see a lot of that in the stores now, to say, well, I'm going to eat these muffins because they're fat-free, but they may be loaded with sugars.
Still muffins.
Absolutely. And I see that, and I fall prey to that easily. We're saying, oh, it's fat-free, so that's healthy. But sometimes what the food makers will do is they'll load it with sugars. And that's the thing, is when you're replacing bad calories with even worse calories, that's when you can start running into trouble.
Jay?
Yeah, I have to agree. So let's debunk that myth. So dietary cholesterol in general is not what causes your cholesterol in your bloodstream to be high, but it is actually fatty foods, things that, particularly artificial fats like trans fats. So those are the fats that take liquids like oils and turn them into hard stuff, which make your cookies taste better, your pizza taste better, and cheeses taste better. But unfortunately, those are what harden your arteries. And so that's actually those fats that end up increasing your serum cholesterol. And as well, they're hugely high in calories. So if you're not actually burning those calories, you're depositing that fat on you, and that will increase your blood pressure, increase your risk for diabetes, and increase your risk for heart attacks and strokes.
Do you want to add to that, Danielle?
Just to say that I think that this our understanding of fat and sugar is really evolving. And I think there was a period of time, it's clear now in retrospect, where we were focusing so much on getting rid of fat in the diet that we inadvertently, particularly in North America, adopted a very high sugar diet. And that, it seems now in retrospect, was a mistake. So I think a little bit less of a focus on fats and a little bit more of a focus on eating things that, as is so often said, your grandmother would have recognized as food is probably a good way to start. Less processed food, less chemical stuff, less things out of the freezer aisle and more things out of the fresh produce aisle is probably a good place to begin.
And they did studies comparing all the different diets you can do, the low-fat diet, the high-fat diet, the low-sugar diet, the Ornish diet, et cetera, and so forth. I mean, Maria can speak to this, but they all turned out to be the same in terms of head-to-head competition. It's as long as you can find a diet that works for you and stick to it, as you said, it's something about healthy patterns and balance, right?
Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to add to this is, so often, like in the media, when we're talking just casually as well, it's very easy just to focus on individual nutrient parts, but we eat food. We don't eat just saturated fat alone. And so there's so much more to food that we still don't know about. And so now many clinical practice guidelines, you mentioned different types of diets, like there's the Mediterranean diet, there's a DASH diet. And not to confuse people, but what basically these dietary patterns are looking at are largely plant-based focus without necessarily being vegetarian. So it's a shift away from looking at just fat, sugar, or individual nutrient parts, but looking at a whole pattern or style of eating that really we know that's evidence-based to bring about benefit and improve health outcomes.
All right, let me do a quick once around the table on what your number one thought would be, your number one piece of advice in terms of working on your diet. We've heard a lot of things here already, but if there's one thing, what would it be for you, Sam?
Watch the extra sugar you put in your drinks every day.
Yeah, it's hard if you're drinking soft drinks.
Absolutely.
Just stop.
Yeah.
Jay?
Yeah, so I'm going to take it a step further. So a big step is to take away the sugary sweetened drinks. The beverages don't add anything. They're full of sugar, and you can replace them with water. So we always talk about trade-offs sometimes in terms of costs as well. In some low-income families, it's difficult to make choices. If your tap water is good for you, if it's safe, and we know from Flint that you have to be careful sometimes, but if that's the case, then it's a better trade-off than the sugary drinks, and you can lose about 10 pounds in a year if you just cut those out of your daily routine.
Danielle?
I'd add alcohol to that. So, pop, juice, and alcohol are sources of empty calories and empty sugars. So I'm not saying you can never have a drink, but it's amazing how many calories and how much sugar a person can consume just from fluids. And that's not the stuff that fills you up and makes you feel like you've had a decent meal. So keeping an eye on alcohol, I would add.
Maria?
Yeah. And while I agree with everything that you're saying here, I think a lot of times we focus too much on what people need to be excluding from their diet and not enough of what they need to be including. And oftentimes it's not what they're taking out that's the problem, it's what's missing to begin with. And so I would say more plants.
More plants.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what puzzles me. I recognize that there's been lots of improvement over the last half century, but everything we're saying here at the table here is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. We should know these things, right? We're still losing somebody every 7 minutes for heart disease or stroke.
Oh.
Why are we still looking at that number?
So they call the risk factors the silent killers for a reason. So you could be eating really well, and this does circle back to genetics. There are going to be clusters of folks who are predisposed to some of these risk factors, and that may not be anything to do with their environmental decisions and their healthy lifestyle. And so it is important that you get checked up with your family physician on a regular basis, because these silent killers include high blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar. Smoking, maybe that's self-evident, but I can't tell you. So I have a friend of mine who the other day says to me, I don't know if I should mention this to you. I've been having some headaches and my blood pressure has been through the roof for 20 years and no one did anything about it. So you'd be surprised that even today in the common, modern era, that there are still these risk factors that are prevalent and they need to be addressed. That's how we'll reduce risk substantially.
Samir, you were saying earlier about it with elderly patients of yours and telling them about stopping smoking can still make a difference, even at an advanced age. So you've got a 75-year-old who's smoking and you tell them to stop smoking, it's going to make a difference?
There was a great study that was published a year ago that looked at 18,000 people in Sweden, and and they were all 75 and older, and it followed them, for this period to show that those who actually didn't smoke versus those who did smoke, those who exercised regularly versus those who didn't, just those two big differences resulted in 3 to 4 extra years of life. So the idea that as you get older, you still can achieve gains, in life expectancy if you give up those bad habits at that point, or you adopt healthy habits. But you're going to get far greater gains over the lifespan if you adopt those habits earlier.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We didn't really touch on exercise. We kind of mentioned it, but diet and exercise go together on all this. We have got to take that quick break. But when we come back, this question: how hard is it to reverse bad habits? And welcome back to our National Checkup panel. Heart and stroke is our focus tonight with doctors Danielle Martin, Samir Sinha, and Jay Udell, and dietitian Maria Recupero. All right, I know that people have been taking notes at home. They're going to make all these changes in their diet, in their lifestyle. How much of a difference can that really make? Can you reverse a pattern that's developing in your body?
You can absolutely reverse a pattern, but as I think we all have experienced in our lives, it's really easy to make a change. It's really hard to sustain one. And so this is where we get into questions of not just what we can do as individuals, but what we can do together in terms of policy, in terms of the way we design our cities, our buildings. I work in a new hospital where the stairs are visible right in the center of the lobby. It's a lot harder to walk past them to go to the elevator than it used to be. So there are all kinds of ways that we can kind of nudge our own behavior by making healthier food more affordable, et cetera. Because, as I say, it's easy to make a quick change. It's really hard to continue with that change in the long term.
Yeah, but what if you work on the 10th floor?
Yeah, so, you have one flight at a time.
Yeah. Jay?
So my mother-in-law does a great thing. Every night after dinner, she goes out for a walk, whether it's hot, whether it's cold, sunny, snowy. It's something that may be just a little thing, but it's an additional amount of exercise, and it is a little bit of an effort, but she does it with the family. She takes the kids, she takes the grandchildren, they love it. So just working that into your daily routine, it's tough, I know, but spending some time with your family is something we all cherish. Do it while you're walking or do some activities. I think that if you just make little baby steps, pun intended, at the beginning, it will come with time.
You know, sometimes in the gym, yes, I visit the gym, but I'll see elderly people, older than me, believe it or not, who are, you know, say on the treadmill and walking very slowly, very slowly.
Yeah.
That still makes a difference.
I'm going to turn this one over to Samir, but absolutely still makes a difference.
All right.
Every bit counts. And I think this is the key thing, is that when we're trying to think about, going to the gym, well, maybe just take the stairs instead, right? You know, a colleague of ours, Dr. Mike Evans, has really promoted this idea of make your day harder. And so I do that now at the hospital every day. I say, well, I could take the escalators, or I could actually just take the stairs. And it's just making those choices. And the other thing I find that I advise, do, and I do myself, is I tell people I'm going to go to the gym, because if they ask me, how was the gym? And I say, well, I actually chickened out, then it means that I feel a sense of responsibility. And that's another great way to nudge yourself into actually getting things done.
Yes,
I think the other thing is we're treating the heart, we're talking about heart today and we're talking about some other body part tomorrow, but of course there are lots of reasons to get on the treadmill and walk, even if it's super slow, not just for your heart, right? So that senior is improving his or her balance. They're having a social interaction, which is also protective for your health and reduces your mortality. So, it's important not to kind of separate all the different body parts out. Staying active and engaged in activity is good for, our whole selves.
All right, Maria, you get the last word.
Okay, so I work in cardiac rehab, and I feel that very fortunate to be there, because not only is there a nutrition component, but there's also a huge exercise component. And there is emerging research that's actually showing that aside from formal exercise, activities of daily living, just moving about, what you're talking about here, really makes a difference. And so the more sedentary we are, the more harmful it is. And that's even outside of like 30 minutes of exercise a day. So every little bit helps for sure.
All right. Well, that means I'm going to walk around the studio a half dozen times during our next break. Thank you all.